The Diary of a Certified Psychopath. 9th of October, 2021. Plain-clothed canter. And in crude contrast to last night's unseasonably mild meander, this frigid crack-of-dawn, low-cadence coastal haul was little more than a mission to evade ABH. Though I'd argue till the ends of this earth, or at least my fleeting existence upon it, that the true essence of cycling extends far beyond Strava's subculture of comms, kudos, and the assiduous application of several hundred rules within one little red book. There are, of course, occasions when engaging in more rigorous outdoor activities during the off-season becomes essential, whether this forms part of a regular exercise regime or a fixed training program to attain specific levels of fitness. It is during these challenging times when ABH can become a detrimental influence. This personally conceived acronym stands for ambient bodily harm, and is intended to collectively define the palpable environmental variables that contrive to actively and systematically suppress the level of physical exertion we would normally be applying were such catalysts not to be of sufficient intensity, and surreptitiously supplants it with equally strenuous, non-aerobic discomfort. The kind of pernicious natural phenomena that cause you to gaze at your Garmin in astonishment following a 2-hour ride and wonder precisely how, when feeling almost twice as exhausted, that you've incinerated half the calories within 2 hours as during yesterday morning's 45-minute Zwift session. Wind chill, surface fatigue, and traffic density are this suffering psychopath's three major bugbears, and combating such persistent visceral obstacles can be a complex and onerous ordeal. One effective method that I have already discussed is to take practical measures to ensure that you are no longer consciously compelled to take potentially hazardous risks in compensating for these aerobic impediments, which can frequently exacerbate their effects. For example, a weightier frame, wider tyres, and a thermally insulated puffer jacket respectively provide native shock absorbance, relief from frigidity, and indigenously elevated levels of resistance, thereby necessitating a notable increase in effort to sustain a perceptibly similar pace as on a feather-light carbon stallion. In my case, there remains a small but significant percentage of energy that would otherwise translate into watts on a stationary bike whilst ambling up a virtual Alp that is unconditionally reserved to endure colder, harsher conditions, as well as process reality's multitude of cognitive distractions. If this is merely the body's innate survival mechanism at play, it should probably be welcomed rather than shunned, though I find it fascinating how accredited biological studies can frequently lead to contradictory evidence. And I believe the reason for the above conclusion is explained within the following paragraphs. Quote, "The outdoor trials were completed along a relatively flat out-and-back course on a paved recreational trail, Keystone Trail, Omaha, USA. The trials concluded in late August to early October, at a time of day when the environmental conditions outside were closest to the general conditions of the laboratory. Overall, the environmental conditions of both the laboratory and outdoor trials were similar in all areas, including temperature, relative humidity, heat index, dew point, wet bulb, and barometric pressure, with the exception of wind speed, which was higher in the outdoor environment and non-existent in the laboratory. Hence, I must reluctantly conclude that until the latest thermally optimized skin suits block as much deep winter chill as they claim, my chances of effectively aligning an electrically space-heated live-work microclimate with Mother Nature's wayward whims are disenchantingly remote." The same day, later. Most efficient means of transport? Despite several million tons of gridlocked traffic and an overly stoked HRM, the true average was between 140 and 150 beats per minute, this is probably the closest I've come in several months to aerobically replicating a Zwift session in real life, at least far closer than this morning's slow-twitch slog through a sea fret thicker than quick-drying cement, and as frigid as the Earl King's icy grasp. When considering the ambient thermal discrepancy of 10 degrees between these two activities, this perhaps confirms that the most influential atmospheric regulator of perceived physical exertion is temperature. And to revisit the study cited in my previous description, at the risk of grinding against the grain of conventional science, I am perplexed as to why such stringent measures were taken to ensure that conditions within a controlled laboratory were so forensically synchronized with those of an outdoor facility, when the experiment's principal objective was to determine the existence of a discrepancy between the efforts one consciously or manifestly applies during two fundamentally contrasting forms of training and, if identified, the extent of such a variation. If the vast majority of our virtual and actual climates are so rarely a perfect match, it would surely imply that the reason why so many might claim a 90-minute date with harsh reality is perceptibly as onerous as only 1 hour of turbo-based toil and tears spent racing animated avatars around ever more elaborate simulated constructs most likely relates to the additional hindrances one is forced to endure, negotiate, and compensate for when venturing outside their artificial comfort zone. Environmental adversities such as wind chill or painfully rough terrain, topographical variances including a greater number of descents resulting in lengthier periods of freewheeling, psychological distractions, not least reckless critters crossing your path, maintaining militant form within your chain gang or planning your next coffee stop, and lastly, life-threatening hazards such as blind turns, busy roundabouts, or that 10-ton cement mixer you're convinced is about to run you into a ditch. All of which can inflict palpably similar amounts of physical suffering to those experienced during an intense pain cave session on a stationary bike, but without expending equal aerobic energy.